This morning, before I get to the content of my message, just as your pastor, I feel like it's important for me to pause right now, to speak for just a moment, to reflect on what has taken place in our nation here over these last few days. If you follow the news at all, you are aware that the Supreme Court has overturned Roe versus Wade, the law that allowed for abortions. And there has been much that has already taken place. There has been much language that has been shared by believer and unbeliever alike. There has even been acts of violence that have already taken place. So I just need you to hear me as your pastor today. While I think it is appropriate for us as believers in Christ to be grateful, to be thankful that the decision was made. If you were here during our Elephant in the Room series months ago, you may remember that I have challenged you that this issue of abortion is not a simple issue. And even the Supreme Court's decision does not just magically erase the issue in our country. Yes, it may make the getting of an abortion technically illegal in some way, shape, or form. It does not erase the underlying elements that are a part of that. So this is what I'm asking you to do, church. Allow God's grace to control your thought and your word. Be mindful that just as much as we as believers perhaps are rejoicing this day in that decision, there are countless people across our country and even around our world that are looking at us and saying, "What in the world are you thinking? You people are crazy. That is not right." And we need to understand that. We need to, again, be reminded by the Spirit of the very real challenges that face women. We need to be mindful that it's not just a decision to end a pregnancy because I didn't want a child. Many times, and impacted by this decision of the Supreme Court, are those abortions that are happening because of the health of the mother, because of underlying physical circumstances. And I'm just asking you to allow God's grace to direct your thought and your word, and that you would commit to continuing to pray that God would move in the hearts of people. And also pray this. I think now more than ever, the church, our church, Church Universal, Big C Church, needs to seek the face of the Lord and know how that we can perhaps step up in new ways and care for the hurting, care for those who are confused, care for the fearful now because they don't know what they will do. We need to be honest about issues like adoption and foster care. And I'm just asking that you would be prayerful about that. Be careful what you say in public and in the public arena of social media, and allow God to direct your hearts. So with those things in mind, I'm just going to ask that you bow your heads with me one more time. Father, thanks for this day, and I am so grateful for so many things. I am grateful for life today, and you have called us as your people to value life. Father, I am also fully aware today, or maybe not fully aware, but very much aware that the decision of our Supreme Court in these last few days is fraught with all kinds of challenges for many people, notwithstanding your church. And so, God, I pray that you would help us to be salt and light, to speak not just with truth, but, Lord, also with grace. That you would give us hearts of compassion, not just hearts that celebrate a decision, but hearts of compassion for the broken, the hurting, those who feel that they have no other choice, perhaps. Lord, would you break our hearts for the countless children that sit in adoption agencies waiting for someone to care for them, the thousands of children that occupy our foster care system that need a home. Lord, we cannot just pick out a pet project and let that be the only thing, because you have called us to view life holistically. You have called for us to care for people holistically. So God, would you lead us and guide us, not only today, but in the days ahead? I ask these things in your name. Amen. Well, once again, good morning. Good to see you here today. Glad that you're here. I know that there are a lot of folks that are perhaps down in FLC and kitchen area and so forth, getting things ready. And I hope that you will stick around. I hope that you listened to that announcement. This party on the lawn is not just for parents of VBS kids. This is a party, a celebration for all of us. Church, we need to be together. We are better together, and fellowship opportunities collectively aren't always very prevalent. And so take the opportunity to stick around. Even if you don't eat, even if you don't climb in the bouncy house, stick around, fellowship with each other. Although I'd pay to see some of you in the bouncy houses today. I don't know. But stick around. Enjoy some fellowship. Connect with our children. We value, as a church, the next generation. And one of the ways that we can show that we care for them, that we value them, is to be with them, to celebrate in the things that they are celebrating today. So I just really want to encourage you to stick around. But for this moment, it is now week 4 of the Best Sermon Ever series, wading through, exploring the things of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus is laying out the aim and the guiding principles of life in the kingdom. And I've been challenging you throughout this series, and rather than simply seeing these principles as that list of things that we either do or we don't do, that we would look at what Jesus says, that we would hear what Jesus says, and listen through the lens of relationship. Relationship matters to God. So much so that he sent his son to die on a cross that you and I might have relationship with him restored. Relationship cost God the life of his son. Relationship matters. So in Matthew chapter 5, as the sermon begins, the Beatitude teaches us that there is a deep joy and blessing being citizens in Jesus' kingdom for those who, through that relationship with him, have submitted to his rule and to his reign. Chapter 5 goes on to teach us about things of the law, and the way of the kingdom calls for you and I to have a higher standard of living in relationship. Jesus teaches us that our words matter, our attitudes and our thoughts matter, our actions matter, our heart matters. Why? Because in the end, God says that relationships matter. And all of those things can negatively impact our relationship, not only with God, but with each other. Last week we talked about prayer, and prayer being a channel for relationship with Jesus. And today, as we once again return to chapter 6, we're going to see and hear that Jesus is adding some things to prayer that are other expressions, other channels of relationship. Now, I want to say this. These things that Jesus is speaking of today, they are not unique to Christianity. In chapter 6, Jesus talks about prayer, but he also talks about giving to the poor, and he talks about fasting. There are other world religions that practice all 3 of those things. However, what Jesus says to us is that it is more than just simply a matter of simple religious expression or action. In fact, to be a citizen of the kingdom means that we understand that mere religion does not create relationship. You can have all the religious practice that you want to, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and none of that religious action will ever bring relationship. As citizens in the kingdom, we also need to understand that apart from relationship, there is no life. Religion does not bring relationship, and apart from relationship, there is no life. So with that in mind, think for just a moment, pause for just a moment, and think of a significant relationship in your life. Someone that you care for deeply, you love them. Could be your spouse, it could be your parents, it could be your children. But just pause for a moment and think about that relationship. When you value that relationship, what are some of the things that you do to show that you value it? Well, here are some things that we often do when we value a relationship. We demonstrate it by action or expression. There are actions that we carry out that demonstrate our love and our value. In fact, I would suggest to you that if you say you love, for example, your spouse, and you never demonstrate it, it's a very stunted love. In fact, I would question whether it's really love at all. There are lots of ways that we can show our love through action. We can acts of service. We can do acts of service. We can buy gifts for that person that we love. These are actions that we do. There's another way that we often show that we value relationships, and that's that we give that relationship priority. I mentioned to you last week about the things of social media, and we live in this social media world. And many of us, if we were to go onto our Facebook account and look to see how many people are listed in the friends category, we would probably find that we have quite a large number of Facebook friends. But can I really call those Facebook friends friends if I rarely talk to them and if I rarely, if ever, spend time with them? I may know them, they may be an acquaintance, but can I really say that I value their friendship if I never talk to them, if I don't make them a priority? Do you spend intentional, focused time together with that person that you love? Will you sacrifice in some way for that person? And why do we sacrifice? Because the joy, the blessing that other person receives is far more important than what perhaps we receive from a relationship. We make it a priority. So with those two things, actions and priority in mind, take your Bible, turn with me to Matthew's Gospel, first book of the New Testament, Matthew chapter 6. We're going to begin in verse number 1. I'll be referring in part to some of the text that we looked at last week, but I'll spend more time in other sections. Matthew chapter 6, verse 1, Jesus says this: "Beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise, you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. So when you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be honored by men. Truly, I say to you, they have their reward in full. But when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." Now jump, if we would, over to verse 16. Jesus goes on and say this: "Whenever you fast, do not put on a gloomy face as the hypocrites do, for they neglect their appearance so that they will be noticed by men when they are fasting. Truly, I say to you, they have their reward in full. But you, when you fast, anoint your head, wash your face, so that your fasting will not be noticed by men, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So then if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters. He will either hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." Jesus is talking in this text the language of relationship. Why? Because God is a God of relationship. God is a God of relationship. I said at the beginning that God values relationship with us so much that he sent his son to die on the cross. He's a God of relationship. And in our text, Jesus gives us channels for that relationship. Verse number 1 in chapter 6. Beware of practicing your righteousness before men. What is Jesus talking about? Well, if you look in chapter 6, you'll see what he's talking about. When he says, beware of practicing your righteousness, he's talking about giving to the poor. Your translation may say giving to charity when you practice your charity. It may say when you give alms to the poor, when you make a contribution to the poor, when you pray, which is what we talked about last week. And he also talks about fasting in verse 16 and beyond. Those three things are primary things in the life of the Jewish person that were a part of their relationship. That's why I ask you, well, what are some of the things that you do to show that you value relationship with someone? For the Jew, the way that they showed and expressed their relationship with God was through practicing righteousness. They're giving to the poor, they're praying, they're fasting. And Jesus in this text tells us that he expects us as his followers, as citizens of the kingdom, to make use of these very same channels. Chapter 6, verse 2. So when you give to the poor, verse 3, but when you give, Jesus doesn't say if you happen to give to the poor. And if you would go to verse 16, he doesn't say if you would happen to fast. He says, no, when you do these things. Jesus expects us to lean into our relationship with God through giving to the poor, through prayer like we talked about last week, and through fasting. Jesus also tells us in the text that there is reward for leaning into relationship. There is a blessing for this kind of relationship. Now, I want to pause to say to you what I said to you last week. Jesus is not simply rewarding religious action. It's not enough just to go through the motions. That's why I said to you that religion does not bring relationship. Jesus is concerned about relationship. So he is not just talking about some outward expression. Jesus says that he rewards this inner attitude, this inner side of our lives and our relationship with him. Jesus doesn't want us to give to the poor. He doesn't want us to pray. He doesn't want us to fast simply out of some kind of duty, out of a mindset that says, well, I have to do this. It's a heartless duty. No, Jesus wants our whole heart as a part of these actions, and that's the kind of action that Jesus says the Father rewards. So now let's talk a little bit more deeply about this love relationship with God. What does it look like? What is God looking for? Well, we could begin today by talking about our motives or the quality of our love today. Talk about the quality of our love, the motives. And so here are two things. First is this: love is something. If we're going to talk about our relationship with God and what he desires for it to be, we need to answer this question. Love is, and we're going to fill in the blank. Here's what Jesus teaches us in the text. Kingdom relationships are marked by a love that is sincere. A love that is sincere. Sincerity in giving and sharing with others through giving to the poor. Sincerity that is found in our life of prayer. Sincerity in pursuing the presence of God in fasting. In our text today, on more than one occasion, Jesus uses the word hypocrite. Chapter 6, verse 2, but when you give to the poor, do not sound the trumpet before you as the hypocrites do. Verse 16, and when you fast, do not put on a gloomy face as the hypocrites do. You have perhaps heard me say it. You've perhaps heard other teachers or pastors say this. But if you know anything about the meaning of the word hypocrite is someone who acts a part, someone who pretends to be something they are not. And what Jesus is saying is, if you are doing these things for the purpose of being recognized only by those around you as opposed to developing your relationship with God, then you are simply playing a part. You are simply acting out some kind of falseness. There is no sincerity in your actions. It's what I talked about last week when I talked about prayer, and that they got stuck with the form of their prayer or the place of their prayer or the language of their prayer. When we get stuck with just pretending like we actually care about the poor, when we get stuck pretending like we really want to have conversation with God in prayer, when we get stuck in this place of just pretending like we really want to pursue Him with all of our heart and mind through fasting, then we've missed the mark. It becomes religion, not relationship. You see, simply obeying the rules is not enough. Jesus doesn't just want our obedience, He wants our sincere obedience. Mark, that fly is back around, so if you want to come up and try and chase him down for me. Mark Bowen did his best to try and snag that fly before service, but he's come back to me, so. Yeah, God is looking for sincerity in our relationship. If we would go back to chapter 5 from a few weeks ago, Jesus says to them, you've heard it said, here is the law. You've heard it said, but I say to you. Why is Jesus teaching that way? Because Jesus understood that there was a missing level even of sincerity in being obedient to the law. They weren't trying to be obedient. They were trying to find outs, ways they could kind of skirt around the law and not live into it in its fullest capacity. That's to live insincerely. Jesus says to us in our text that insincerity will always pursue the wrong reward. Verse 1 and 2, if you practice your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Verse 2 says that if you sound the trumpet in the synagogues and the streets so that you would be honored by men. They weren't doing these things to please the Lord. They were doing to attract attention to themselves. And you'd find the same language when he talks about fasting. They've pursued the wrong thing. You say and you act like you want God's approval or a deeper relationship with him, but what you are pursuing says the opposite of that. It says, I am more important or more concerned about what other people will say about me than what God will say about me. You see, insincerity will always pursue the wrong reward. It wasn't the deed, but it was their reputation for the deed that they sought. Here's a side note for you about this issue of reward. This is the word of Bible scholar William Barclay. He says this, there's a great paradox in Christian reward. And here's what this paradox is. The person who looks for reward and who calculates that it's due to him will not receive it. But the purpose whose only motive is love, and I would go on to add to that, sincere love, an earnest desire for a deep relationship with God, if that's your motive, and who never thinks that he has deserved any reward, does in fact receive it. If you go out chasing after some blessing of God, God, look at all the nice things I've done for you. Just give me a reward. If that is your pursuit, you'll not get the reward that you're looking for. But if we respond, as it says in the Beatitudes, as one who is poor in spirit, who says, God, I come before you with nothing to offer. There is nothing that I can do to earn your love. I am not worthy of your love, your mercy, and your grace. He says, the kingdom of heaven is yours. See, when we chase after the wrong reward, we miss the mark, and our relationship is negatively impacted. But there's a second thing about what love is, and that's this. Love, according to Jesus in this text today, our love for God is meant to be exclusive. Exclusive. God will have no rival. In fact, the text of Scripture tells us that our God is a jealous God. Jesus tells us in the text that we can't look at earthly treasure and raise that up to a higher level. No, Our earthly treasures cannot matter to us more than a heart relationship with God. You and I cannot be kingdoms or citizens of the kingdom and remain citizens at the same time of the world. We can't have one foot on one side of the fence and one foot on the other side of the fence. Why? Because God demands exclusivity in our love relationship with him. You and I, we cannot have Jesus and. It can't be Jesus and Zen Buddhism. It can't be Jesus and some other form of religion. It can't be Jesus and tarot cards. It can't be Jesus and my horoscope. It can't be those things. Why? Because he demands exclusivity. And the God of all of creation is certainly worthy of those things. It cannot be Jesus and my earthly possessions. That bumper sticker of he who dies with the most toys wins is false. God demands exclusivity in our love. The text tells us that his lordship is meant to be over all of our being, over all of our life. No man, it says, Jesus, in the tail end of our passage, can serve two masters. God will have no rival. Our love is to be exclusive. Now, what keeps us from this kind of exclusivity, this kind of surrender? Well, one of the things that keep us from that, and we're even seeing it fleshed out in this issue of abortion, it's the issue of pride. Pride drives our reluctance to give God all of ourselves, to make him first and foremost. What is one of those common phrases that we hear in the abortion conversation? It's my body, it's my choice. I have total control over everything about me, and no one will tell me what to do. Now, that's minimizing that argument to a little bit of degree. But part of what is behind that is our fallenness and our belief in our own mind and heart that we will have no other sovereign other than ourselves. And God says to us, no, the sovereign that you need is my sovereignty over you. When pride stands between us and God, it will always impact our relationship. That's why James chapter 1 tells us that God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. Again, please do not hear me on the abortion issue of making that simplified. That's just a illustration of what that attitude is like. You can't tell me what to do. Our children tell us that. When our kids are growing up and we ask them to do stuff, what's the phrase? You're not the boss of me. We stand with that proud heart that says, no, I will stand as sovereign over my choices. And God says, no, I must be sovereign. It's what love is. So when Jesus says that if your giving is born of pride, if your fasting is born of pride, to be noticed by other people, that pride will stand between me and you. That pride will interrupt our relationship because love must be exclusive. It must be sincere. But love also comes with action. So love does. Love not only is, but love does. He begins the text by saying that love gives. Alms, charity, giving to the poor. Again, I remind you that Jesus has an expectation that we will do these things when you give, not if you give. Jesus models for us a love that gives, especially to those who are on the margin. If you look at the life of Jesus, where does he go in ministry? Who does he connect with? Most often is the people on the margins, the people who society says, you are not worth anything. And Jesus comes to them, the poor, the downcast, the downtrodden, and he says, I love you. I want to be in relationship with you. Listen to what it says, and the words are going to be on the screen from 2 Corinthians chapter 8. It says this about Jesus, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes, for my sake, your sake, Jesus became poor, that we through his poverty might become rich. Jesus models for us a love that goes to those who are in need. Jesus would say in Matthew chapter 10, verse 8, freely you have received, now freely give. That's what Jesus calls us to Why? Because love does. Love gives. And what does Jesus say to us about our giving? That giving should be not begrudging, it shouldn't be stingy, it shouldn't be tight-fisted, but instead it should be generous, it should be extravagant. In fact, it is generosity that is extravagant that is Jesus' expectation. If we would go back to chapter 5. In Matthew's Gospel, verse 42, give to him who asks, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you. Jesus is saying when you give, don't put limits on it. Don't be stingy. Don't be tight-fisted. Give freely to that person who asks. And now go back to a portion of our text today. Maybe it's a portion of the text that you perhaps are a bit puzzled by. It's verses 22 and verse 23. Jesus says this, the eye is the lamp of the body, and if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. Then the light that is in you is darkness. How great is that darkness? Jesus is talking about issues of clarity here. He's talking about the eye, much like you would talk about perhaps dirty windows. Anybody in the room just really love to clean dirty windows? Anybody in the room that ever gets like me, that you failed to clean your glasses until they get to the point where you can barely see through the level of dust and grime that's on them? Violet, thank you for your honesty. I'm there. In fact, I looked at mine this morning driving to church going, oh, I really need to clean my glasses. I don't know how I can see through them. When there is dirt there on the lens, as it were, it makes it difficult to see clearly. But what is Jesus talking about here? Well, we can read this text and say, well, if your eye is evil, if how you view the world, your motives of your heart, if they're evil, well, then that's a bad thing. But if it's clean, then that's a good thing. Or if it's clear, it's a good thing. But in our text, the word that Jesus uses for clear is this word haplatos, and it is a word that means healthy, sincere, and generous. And the word that he uses for evil is the word poneros, and it's the word that means begrudging and stingy. And what Jesus is saying to us in these two verses is this: when our view of life is generosity, then we will have the clearest vision not only of our relationship with God, but we'll have our clearest relationships with other people. But if we look at God and we look at other people with a begrudging mindset, a stingy mindset, it will cloud those relationships. Jesus says when you give, you are to give generously. You see, there's nothing like generosity for giving us that clarity in relationship between God and other people. And there is nothing like being begrudging that will distort our view. When we look at other people and say they don't deserve it, that will distort our view. We have forgotten then that none of us deserved it. None of us have done anything to deserve God's grace, but if you remember the text from 2 Corinthians, though he was rich, yet for our sakes, not because we deserved it, that he became poor, that we through his poverty might become rich. He has called us to generous giving. It's hard to be loving and stingy at the same time. It's hard to have good, healthy, growing relationships with God and other people if you are stingy in your experience with them. Not only does love give, but I believe love in this text today does something else. Love pursues. It begins by pursuing God himself. Last week we talked about prayer, which is a conversation, a communion with God, a connection point with God. Today in our text, Jesus is talking about fasting. For the Jew, the main point of fasting was this: fasting was an indication of the authenticity of one's repentance. When you wanted to demonstrate that you were truly repentant before God for your sin, you fasted. When you wanted to draw God's attention to a need in your life, you fasted. You wanted that connection with him. When you wanted to demonstrate the sincerity of your prayer to God, you fasted. And we even today often couple fasting and prayer together. We've drawn from the ancients in that way. It was a way of connecting. It was a way of pursuing God. So why should you and I fast to pursue God? When you and I fast, we are saying that we are willing to set aside time to fully focus on Him. That's why I challenged you at the beginning with, well, what are some of those things about your earthly relationships that are demonstrations? And I said, you make those relationships a priority. Fasting is a way that we can make our relationship with God a priority because we say, you know what, God, I am willing to set aside this, my life, my hungers, my appetites, so that I can focus only on you. It's why we should fast. It's why God should stir your heart from time to time to fast. Fasting is a way that we can demonstrate our sincerity. We can demonstrate that God and our love for Him is exclusive, because fasting not only sharpens your prayer life and deepens your relationship, but fasting can break you from those appetites that keep you from the relationship to start with. Fasting can break us from those things. Jesus says to us that love, real love, the kind that belongs to citizens of the kingdom, pursues God Himself. But not only that, Jesus tells us in our text today that the love of kingdom citizens pursues the things of God. The things of God. He talks about treasures in heaven. The ancients looked at treasures in heaven this way. They believed that the treasures of heaven were your kindness, your character, the kind of character and kindness that is reflective of God Himself. It's what Jesus is talking about in the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Are you pursuing the things of God today? Are you reflecting His character? Are you submitting to His ongoing, sanctifying, cleansing work in your life, so that more and more as you pursue God and pursue the things of God, you become like Him? These disciplines of giving to the poor, of prayer and fasting, are avenues that we can pursue the things of God. Jesus also tells us that to pursue the things of God is to invest in the eternal rather than the temporary. Don't invest in the temporary. Why? Because moth will come in, rust will come in, which is decay. Thieves will come in and steal and destroy these things. In ancient times, the things that were of greatest value to the Jewish people were your garments. Your garments, the clothing that you wore, and we are not all that different today. But our clothes make the man, is one of those colloquial phrases that we say. Every girl is crazy about a sharp-dressed man. That was a song from like the 80s or 90s. Clothing is something that we value in earthly existence, but moths will eat those things away. Grain was a source of value. That's why Jesus teaches a parable about a man whose crops did really, really well, and he says, well, I need to tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Why? It's a sign of success. It's a sign of wealth, my grain. But there's also gold that thieves want to break in and steal. Those are the things in ancient times that they chased after. But Jesus tells us that when we chase after those things, they'll just simply wear out. They'll erode away. They'll be stolen away. Jesus also tells us that the approval, the applause, the attention of men when you give, when you pray, when you fast, that attention of man is just as fleeting, just as temporary as your garments, your grain, and your gold. Because one day you will have the applause of men, and the next day you will not. To use the language of an old TV show called Project Runway, in fashion, one day you're in, and the next day you're out. If you are living your life for the applause of men, one day you'll have it, and one day you will not. We cannot chase after the temporal. Jesus says that if we are to be kingdom citizens, we must pursue the things of God, which are the eternal. Martin Luther says it this way: what a man loves, that's his God. For he carries it in his heart. He goes about with it day and night. He sleeps with it. He wakes up with it, be it what it may, wealth, pleasure, or renown. Are you pursuing the things of God today, or are you pursuing the things of the world? If you're pursuing the things of the world, then you are valuing religion over relationship. And Jesus is challenging us today to value relationship more than religion. Religion has to be subservient because only relationship will bring life. Religion will never produce eternal life. You and I can never balance the scales to purchase for ourselves forgiveness of our sin and eternal life. That will only come in relationship with Jesus himself. It's the only place of life. Good works, pious practices like giving to the poor, praying and fasting will never do it. Doing those things purely from a have-to foundation for a relationship with Jesus will leave you exhausted and empty. If you pray and you fast and you give to the poor all out of, well, this is something that I have to do, you will only find yourself weary and empty. Jesus speaks to this. I love Eugene Peterson's paraphrase of Matthew's Gospel in chapter 11. He says this, "Are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me, work with me, watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly." See, religion will never do that for you. Only relationship with Jesus can help you learn to live freely and rightly. I will also say to you that a purely have-to foundation for relationships with others will also leave you empty and exhausted. If you're struggling today in your acts of love, in your sincerity, in your motives, your ability to live appropriately exclusive in your relationship in the earthly realm, it is only relationship with Jesus that can help you live differently. If I am struggling in my own heart, for example, to live exclusive in my love to Wendy, if in the back of my mind I hear the voice of the enemy saying, well, you deserve more. You deserve to have other relationships. You deserve to go out and explore other kind of options. You don't need to be tied down to just one person just because you're married. If I struggle with that at all, it's because I'm trying to do that in the flesh. I need Jesus' life in me that will bring the sincerity, that will bring the exclusivity to my relationship with Wendy. If we want to love others well, that will only happen when it's Jesus' life that is moving in and through us. That's why it is relationship over religion. So I'm going to invite you to stand with me. I'm going to invite Mandy back to the platform this morning. Just going to ask that you bow your head. Quiet your heart before the Lord today. And just ask him what I've been asking you to do all the weeks of this series. Ask him to search your heart. To see if your love for him is sincere. If it is exclusive. Ask him to search your heart, to search your motives. Are you trying to do things to simply please men, or are you chasing hard after the things of him because you value relationship with him over simple religious activity? And if there be anything in you today that is contrary to what he desires, that you would just confess it. That you'd ask God to move in your heart today, to draw you deeper into relationship with him, to make you more like Christ. Father, thanks for today. Thanks for your word to us. Lord, may you deepen our walk with you. If there's anyone today that's never experienced a relationship with you, Lord, that they would, before they would leave today, run to that relationship. and cast themselves at your feet. Lord, would you just do your work in us today, I pray. I ask it in your name. Amen. Would you sing with us this morning? Lord, I come, I confess, bowing here, I find my rest, and without you, I fall apart. You're the one that guides my heart. Oh, how much do you need the Lord today? Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Let's sing that chorus one more time. Lord, I need you. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. God, would you just make that the prayer of our heart, not just today, but every day. Lord, that we would desire deep and abiding relationship with you above all else. And Lord, find in our relationship with you the very life that we need, not only when it comes to eternity and salvation, but the very life and strength that we need to live in right relationship with our brothers and sisters, with our children, with our spouses, with our parents, with our coworkers, our neighbors. For Lord, it is only in relationship that we have life, only in relationship with you. Lord, we need you today. We need you every day. So dismiss us now with your parting blessing. May we go in the grace, the mercy, and the peace that you offer to us through your Son. We ask these things in your name. Amen. Blessings as you go. Be sure to stick around for the party.
Parents, please pick up your kids from the junior worship room downstairs. Thank you.